A dusty courtroom was her stage, and the verdict was her execution. Eliza Beaufort, framed by the very man who vowed to love her, was banished. Cast out of her town, she was dragged to the sun-scorched edge of Apache territory and left for the vultures. But the vultures weren't the first to find her. As the sun bled its last light over the desert, she was surrounded. He was a war chief, a man whose people she'd been taught to fear. But when his eyes met hers, it wasn't death she saw. It was a choice. And in that moment, her old life was burned away, and a new dangerous one began. The town of San Verde, Arizona territory was a splinter of civilization, jammed into the raw red hand of the desert. It was a town of two-faced prosperity, built on silver speculation and quiet, desperate secrets. Eliza Beaufort, with her pale skin and auburn hair, was supposed to be its finest ornament. She was betrothed to Gideon Hale, the man who practically owned San Verde. He owned the bank, the freight company, and by proxy, Sheriff Brody. Eliza's life was a gilded cage, and she had been plotting her escape for months. She had no love for Gideon. His touch felt like spiders, and his smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. She planned to take a small portion of her own dowry money her father had left her, which Gideon had swiftly absorbed into his accounts, and buy a one-way ticket back east to live with a distant aunt. She never got the chance. The trial was a grotesque piece of theatre. Gideon Hale, his face a mask of sorrowful duty, stood before the packed courtroom. "It breaks my heart," he boomed, his voice echoing off the rough-hewn beams, "to find that the woman I intended to make my wife, Eliza Beaufort, has been systematically stealing from the Hale Freight Company. Over $5,000. A collective gasp. Eliza stood numb in the defendant's box. "That's a lie," Gideon told them. "I wish I could, my dear," he said, turning to her with faux pity. "But the ledgers discovered by my clerk are undeniable." He had a witness. Matilda, Eliza's supposed best friend, took the stand. Her eyes were red, but she wouldn't look at Eliza. I saw her. Late at night in Mr. Hale's office. She had the strong box open. I saw her hide the key in her own sewing box." "Liar!" Eliza screamed, lunging before a deputy grabbed her. "Matilda, why?" But Eliza knew why. Gideon owned Matilda's father's mortgage. A single word from him and her entire family would be on the street. The evidence was damning. The key was found in her sewing box. Forged letters were produced, written in her own hand, or a perfect copy of it, detailing plans to meet a lover in San Francisco. And then the final sickening twist. "There is more," Gideon said, his voice dropping. "It is not just theft." He paused, letting the silence strangle the room. "She was intimate with the stable-hand young Patrick. The boy has vanished. We fear in his guilt and shame he has taken his own life." That was the blow that shattered Eliza's composure. Patrick, a kind, simple boy of 17, had helped her practice hitching a wagon for her escape. He was the only person she'd trusted, and now he was gone, likely silenced permanently by Gideon's hired thugs, the Dolan brothers. Eliza was now not just a thief, but a wanton woman, a home wrecker, an adulteress. In the rigid moral code of the West, she was irredeemable. Sheriff Brody, his badge bought and paid for by Hale, didn't let the jury deliberate long. In light of Mr. Hale's merciful request that the territory be spared the spectacle of a hanging, Brody drawled, "This court sentences Eliza Beaufort to banishment. She will be escorted one day's ride to the edge of the Tonto Basin Apache land. From there, her fate is in God's hands." A death sentence, but slower. Gideon Hale looked at her, a possessive, cruel satisfaction in his eyes. He hadn't just gotten rid of her. He had destroyed her. He had taken her name, her future, and her life, all because she had dared to not want him. Two deputies, their faces grim, dragged her from the courtroom. The people who had attended her tea parties and praised her needlework now threw rotten vegetables, spitting the word harlot. She was put on a mule, her hands tied, and led out of San Verde, leaving behind the smoking ruins of her life. The last thing she saw was Gideon Hale lighting a cigar on the steps of his bank. The journey was a blur of humiliation and thirst. The deputies, paid extra by Gideon for their cruelty, gave her only a half-filled canteen for the entire day. They rode east, climbing from the dusty flatlands into the jagged, oppressive heat of the high desert. The terrain grew hostile, a landscape of towering saguaros that looked like skeletal sentinels and rocks baked to the temperature of a skillet. They called this place the Devil's Anvil. At dusk, they reached a dry wash, a barren scar in the earth. One of the deputies, a man with a tobacco-stained beard, cut the ropes on her wrists. "This is it, Missy. Apache territory. Tonto Chiricahua. They all hunt here. You can't just leave me," Eliza whispered, her throat raw. "Sure can," the other deputy said, laughing. "Mr. Hale's orders. Consider it mercy. The Apaches will be quicker than the sun." He threw her small satchel into the dust. It contained nothing but the dress she wore and a single biscuit. They turned their horses around without a backward glance. Their laughter echoed as they disappeared, leaving Eliza in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Panic set in, cold and sharp. She ran after them, stumbling on the loose rock, screaming until her voice was a croak. But they were gone. The sun, a vengeful red eye, began to dip below the western mesas, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The temperature, which had been scorching, began to plummet. She huddled behind a large boulder, weeping. She wept for her father, for the life she'd lost, for the naive boy, Patrick, and for her own stupidity in thinking she could ever cross Gideon Hale. She must have passed out from dehydration and despair. When she woke, the moon was high, bathing the desert in an eerie silver light, and she was thirsty, a desperate, burning thirst that overruled her fear. She remembered the canteen. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking. It was empty. The deputies had emptied it while she was unconscious. A final, petty cruelty. A new resolve, hard and cold, settled over her. She would not die here. She would not give Gideon Hale the satisfaction. She would walk. She didn't know where, but she would walk. She stumbled through the dry wash, her city boots, cracking her feet, already blistering. She walked for hours, guided by the stars, until the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The heat returned, clamping down on her like a physical hand. By midday she was delirious. She saw mirages of lakes of her old home. Vultures began to circle overhead, dark specks against a painfully blue sky. She collapsed. This was it. The end. She closed her eyes, thinking, "At least he won't know how I died." A sound jolted her, not the rattle of a snake, but the soft thud of a horse's hoof on sand. Her eyes snapped open. They were there. Not one, but 5 riders. They were not settlers. They were not soldiers. They were lean, muscular men with dark hair held back by bands wearing leather breechclouts and high moccasins. They were armed with rifles and knives. They sat atop their horses, watching her with an unnerving stillness. Apache, terror pure and primal, shot through her. Everything she had ever heard stories of scalping, of torture, crashed into her mind. One man dismounted. He moved with a lithe grace, more like a panther than a man. He was tall, broader in the shoulder than the others, and his face was starkly handsome, all sharp angles and intelligent obsidian dark eyes. He carried no expression at all. This she knew was the leader. This was the war chief. He stopped a few feet from her. Eliza scrambled backward, clutching a sharp rock, her only weapon. She was a pathetic sight. Sunburned lips cracked her fine dress in tatters. He watched her, his gaze missing nothing. He noted the rock in her hand, the defiant terror in her eyes. He said nothing. "Get it over with," she rasped, lifting the rock. "Just do it." A flicker of something, surprise, curiosity passed through his eyes. He spoke not in the guttural language she expected, but in clear, slightly accented Spanish, which she understood from her time in San Verde. "You are far from your people, white woman." "My people left me." She spat the venom of her betrayal, overriding her fear. "They left me here to die." The man's gaze intensified. He looked at her not as a white woman, an enemy, but as something else. An outcast, an individual. He saw the rope burns on her wrists. He turned to his men and spoke in their own language a series of short, clicking sounds. One of them dismounted and unslung a water skin. He handed it to the chief. The chief, she would later learn his name, was Victorio, stepped forward and held out the skin. Eliza stared at it. It was a trick. They would let her drink, then kill her. "Bergo Zaid," he said this time in Apache. He saw her confusion and switched back to Spanish. "Drink." She stared at his face, searching for the monster she'd been promised. She saw none. She saw only a hard man in a hard land offering her life. Her hand trembled as she reached for the water. She drank the lukewarm water, shocking her system, the most painful and glorious sensation she had ever felt. She drank until he gently took the skin back. He studied her for another long moment. "Your people are not mine," he said, "but the desert will kill you. You will come with us." It was not a request. He turned and swung onto his horse in a single fluid motion. One of his men pulled Eliza up onto the back of his own horse, his grip like iron. As they rode away, the sun finally set, ending the most terrible day of her life. Eliza, captive, exhausted, and terrified, looked at the back of the war chief leading the way. He had not killed her. He had claimed her from the desert. And as the last light died, she realized her heart, which she thought had stopped, was hammering against her ribs, not just with fear, but with a strange, defiant spark of life. The Apache camp, their rancheria, was hidden high in the Dragoon Mountains, a natural fortress of granite and pine. It was nothing like the squalid, dirty villages Eliza had been told about. It was orderly, clean, and vibrant. Women tended to fires, children played loud, laughing games, and men mended tack or cleaned rifles. Eliza's arrival caused an immediate hostile silence. She was the enemy, a Tagota, a White Eye. Victorio dismounted and spoke to the camp. His voice was calm, but held an authority that was absolute. The stares did not soften, but the open hostility receded, replaced by a wary curiosity. He pointed to a woman who was tanning a deer hide, her arms corded with muscle. "Talia," he said. "She will watch you. You will work." Talia, Victorio's sister, was a woman carved from the mountain itself. Her face was a map of grief. Eliza learned later her husband and son had been killed by settlers from a town just like San Verde. Talia's hatred for Eliza was palpable. She shoved a scraping tool into Eliza's hand and pointed at a hide staked to the ground. "Work," she said in broken Spanish. Eliza's old life was over. There were no servants, no silks, no tea parties. Her life was now a collection of agonizing physical tasks. Her soft hands, accustomed to needlework, were shredded within an hour. She scraped hides until her shoulders screamed. She ground corn on a metate until her knees were raw and her back felt broken. She hauled water in heavy clay pots from a spring 1/2 mile down the mountain. She failed constantly. The first batch of flatbread she tried to make was a scorched, inedible rock, which Talia threw into the dirt in disgust. The children pointed and laughed. Eliza, humiliated, fled to the edge of the camp, her face burning. She sat there looking out over the vast expanse of the desert below. This was a new kind of prison. It is harder to live than to die. Victorio's voice. He stood behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Your sister hates me," Eliza said bitterly, wiping her tears with a bloody hand. "She hates the people who took her family." He corrected, sitting on a rock nearby. He was not close enough to be intimate, but not far enough to be distant. "She sees your face, and she sees them. I am not them. I am not Gideon Hale. I am not the men who left me to die. Prove it," he said simply. "How? Live. Work. Stop weeping for the world that threw you away. It is not here." He pointed to the metate she had abandoned. "The corn will not grind itself." His words were harsh, but they were not unkind. They were true. Oh, he was holding a mirror up to her, not to her sunburned face, but to her soul. He was challenging her. Eliza stood up. She marched back to the grinding stone, and ignoring the pain, she began to work. Talia watched her expression unreadable. Days bled into weeks. Eliza's body hardened. Her skin turned brown, her hands calloused over. The blisters scarred and thickened. She learned to anticipate the needs of the camp. She learned to be silent, to observe. She learned which roots were for medicine and which were for dye. She learned to stitch moccasins with an awl and sinew, a skill not so different from her old embroidery. She also learned about Victorio. He was not a savage. He was a brilliant strategist and a burdened leader. She watched him mediate a dispute between two warriors with the wisdom of a judge. She saw him play with his young nephew, a softness in his eyes that beside his hard reputation. He was fighting a losing war, not for glory, but for survival. His people were being squeezed from all sides by the U.S. Army, by bounty hunters, and by encroaching miners. One evening he found her staring into the fire. He had been away for 3 days, tracking a cavalry patrol. "You are still here," he noted, handing her a piece of dried venison. "Where else would I go?" she replied, accepting the food. "You are learning." "I am surviving," she said. "There is a difference." He sat, and the small space between them was comfortable now. "My sister. She said you helped her bind a wound today." "On her son." "It was just a scrape," Eliza said, shrugging. "He fell." "You did not have to. He is her son, not yours." "He was crying," Eliza said simply. Victorio nodded, a long, appraising look on his face. "The white world taught you to be soft. This world is teaching you to be strong. But you were never soft, Eliza. You were only sleeping." He used her name. Not white woman, but Eliza. The sound of it in his voice, deep, respectful, sent a jolt through her she could not explain. He saw her. The real her, not the ornament Gideon Hale wanted, nor the harlot the town condemned. Talia's gaze softened too. Not to friendship, but to a neutral tolerance. Eliza had not flinched from the work. She did not complain. She was against all odds becoming one of them. The banished bride was gone, and in her place was a woman of the Chihende, the red paint people. Winter passed, and a fragile spring bloomed in the high desert. Eliza's life had found a rhythm. She was, if not happy, then content. Her respect for Victorio had deepened into something more potent, something she was afraid to name. She felt his eyes on her, too, a protective, possessive gaze that was nothing like Gideon's cold ownership. It was the gaze of a man who saw her strength as an asset, not a threat. But the world they had hidden from was closing in. Gideon Hale had not forgotten her. Her survival was an insult to his power. He had assumed the desert or the Apache would have finished her. When reports from army scouts and passing prospectors mentioned a white woman living with Victorio's band, his rage became an obsession. He had expanded his freight lines, emboldened by his unchallenged power in San Verde. His wagons laden with silver ore and supplies for new mining camps were now cutting deep into the Apache treaty lands, using the very springs and waterholes that Chihende depended on. A raid happened. A different band of Apache, more desperate and radical, attacked one of Gideon's freight wagons. They killed the drivers and stole the rifles. Gideon had his pretext. He rode to Fort Grant, the nearest army outpost, with a righteous fury. He burst into the office of Captain Monroe, a career soldier who was weary of the endless bloody conflicts. "Captain," Gideon bellowed, throwing a bloody arrow onto the man's desk. "This is an outrage, an act of war. Victorio's band is raiding my freight lines, killing my men." "We don't know it was Victorio," Monroe said tiredly, picking up the arrow. "This fletching, it's not his band's." "Does it matter?" Gideon sneered. "They are all vermin. They must be exterminated." "But there is a complication." He leaned in his voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They have a white captive, a woman from my town, Eliza Beaufort. She was taken months ago, a pure, innocent woman forced to live as their slave." Monroe's expression hardened. "A white captive changes things. That Mr. Hale is a different act of war." "Exactly," Gideon said, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "I am a patriot, Captain. I will fund this expedition myself. I have hired the best trackers in the territory, the Dolan brothers. They will find the rancheria." He unrolled a piece of paper. It was a bounty poster, freshly printed. "Wanted dead or alive. The Apache War Chief. Victorio, $1,000 reward and $500 reward for the safe return of the white captive Eliza Beaufort." "This Archotes," Gideon said, tapping the poster, "is how we bring civilization to this land. You will be a hero, Captain. We will rescue the girl and end the Apache threat in one clean sweep." Monroe looked at the poster, then at Gideon. He disliked Hale finding him arrogant and grasping, but his duty was clear. A white captive was a line that could not be ignored. "Get your trackers, Mr. Hale," Monroe said, standing. "Find the camp. We will move at your signal." Gideon left the fort, his spurs ringing with triumph. He would get his silver through. He would eradicate the pests blocking his path. And he would finally have Eliza back. He didn't care if she was safe. He just cared that she was his, and he would drag her back, broken, or not to show San Verde and her that no one defied Gideon Hale. The shadow of the serpent had fallen over the mountains. Victorio's scouts were the best in the territory. They moved like ghosts, and they brought back news of the bounty poster within a week. He summoned Eliza to his wickiup as the evening meal was being prepared. The mood in the camp was tense. They knew the Togota soldiers were mobilizing. Eliza entered the lodge. Victorio was sitting staring at a copy of the poster, which a scout had torn from a tree. His face was like granite. "He wants you back," Victorio said, his voice flat. He didn't need to say who. Eliza's blood ran cold as she read the poster. "Safe return, a captive." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "He's the one who threw me to the wolves, and now he's painting himself as my savior." "He uses you as a weapon," Victorio said, standing. He paced the small enclosure. "Because you are here, the soldiers have a reason to ride. They do not care about treaties. But a white woman captive, that is a story that makes their blood hot. They will come. They will burn this camp. They will kill our women, our children, all to save you." Eliza stared at him, the horrible weight of his words crashing down on her. I am the reason. You are the excuse, he corrected, his voice sharp. The wolf always finds a reason to kill the sheep. But this is a good reason, one that Captain Monroe will believe. He stopped pacing and stood before her. His proximity was overwhelming, the smell of pine smoke and leather. You have a choice. I do not make it for you. A choice. I will take you myself. Tonight. We will ride to the edge of the fort. You will walk in. You will tell them you escaped. You will be safe again in your world. Hale will have his prize, and Monroe will have his rescued captive. The bounty will be gone. The soldiers will stand down. My people will be safe. Eliza's mind reeled. Go back to Gideon, back to the town that spat on her, to the people who condemned her. She pictured Gideon's triumphant, sneering face as she was dragged back, a fallen dove, to be paraded as his property. It would be a prison far worse than the desert. It would be a living death. She looked at Victorio. His face was impassive, but she could see the tension in his jaw. He was offering her this choice, but it was costing him. And what happens to you? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I am a chief. My life is for my people. It does not matter. It matters to me, she said, her voice finding strength. She stepped closer to him. I was Eliza Beaufort. She was a coward. She was a fool who trusted the wrong people. She died on the devil's anvil. She touched the rough buckskin of her sleeve. My name is Eliza. I am Chihende. Victorio's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. Gideon Hale is a liar and a murderer, she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. He banished me. He tried to kill me. This is my home now. These are my people. I will not run back to the man who put this rope burn on my wrist. She held up her scarred arm. If I go back, I am his slave. If I stay, I am a warrior like you. I will not be your excuse, Victorio. I will be your witness. A long, heavy silence filled the lodge. He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt. He found none. He saw only the fire he had first glimpsed when she held that sharp rock, now grown into a controlled flame. He reached out his hand, hovering over her face. He did not touch her skin, but his fingers gently brushed a lock of her hair. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever known. If you stay, he said, his voice low and rough, you are choosing a war you cannot win. They will come for you, and they will come for us. Then let them come, Eliza said. I am done running. Victorio nodded, a slow, grim smile touching his lips for the first time. Then we will fight Izagola, Eliza. We will show them what it means to hunt the wind. He had given her a choice, and she had chosen them. She had chosen him. The bond forged in thirst and fire was now sealed in blood and loyalty. She was no longer a captive, no longer a refugee. She was home. Gideon Hale was impatient. The Dolan brothers, his hired trackers, were good, but the Apache were better. Weeks turned into a month, and they still hadn't located Victorio's main rancheria. He's playing with us, Gideon raged at Captain Monroe back at the fort. We need to flush him out. We cannot flush out ghosts, Mr. Hale, Monroe replied, frustrated. My patrols find nothing but cold fires. Then you aren't looking hard enough. Gideon Stewing returned to San Verde. He needed leverage. He needed someone who knew the territory, someone who might have had contact. His eyes fell on Samuel, a quiet prospector and trader who lived on the edge of town with his wife and 2 small children. Samuel often traded goods with the more peaceful elements of the local tribes. Gideon and the Dolan brothers paid Samuel a visit at his small, dusty homestead. Samuel, Gideon said, dismounting and striding onto the man's porch. You've been known to fraternize with the natives. I need to know where Victorio's camp is. Samuel, a meek man, shook his head. I don't know, Mr. Hale, and if I did, they're my customers. I don't betray customers. Gideon smiled. He nodded to one of the Dolan brothers. The man, broad as an oak, grabbed Samuel's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him against the porch wall. Samuel's wife screamed from the doorway. Let's be clear, Gideon said, picking an apple from a basket. I am not asking. You will tell me where he is, or my associates here will visit with your wife and children. And then we'll burn this pathetic hovel to the ground. Samuel's face went white with terror. He was a coward, but he was also a family man. No, please, don't hurt them. I've traded with them only once, near the high peaks, in the Dragoon Range. There's a canyon hidden. They call it Tsein Dagai Rock Pocket. Show us on a map, Gideon commanded. Shaking, weeping, Samuel did. He marked the hidden canyon entrance. See, Gideon said, patting Samuel's cheek. That wasn't so hard. You've done the territory a great service. As they rode off, Samuel collapsed on his porch, sobbing in shame. 2 days later, Victorio's scouts returned to the rancheria, their faces grim. They are coming, the lead scout reported. Many soldiers and the Togota trackers. They follow the canyon pass. They know the way. Victorio's face was grim. A betrayal. He looked at Eliza. They will be here by morning. Panic rippled through the camp. This was not a raid. This was an extermination force. We cannot fight them here, Victorio said. Not with the women and children. He turned to Eliza. You found that high ledge, the eagle's nest, when you were gathering herbs. Is it defensible? Yes, Eliza said, her mind racing. The path is narrow, only one person at a time, and it's hidden by brush. You can't see it from the canyon floor. Good. Talia. Victorio commanded his sister. Take the women, the children, and the elders. Take Eliza. Go to the high ledge. Take food, water, and rifles. Do not make a sound. Ezegola, he said, using her Apache name. You will lead them to the path. You are the only one who has seen it clearly. Eliza wanted to argue. She wanted to stay. But she saw the wisdom. The camp was a death trap. Go, he ordered. Talia, her hatred for Eliza, long since replaced by a grudging respect, nodded. Come, she said to Eliza. The evacuation was swift, silent, and desperate. In the pre-dawn darkness, Eliza led the non-combatants up the treacherous hidden path. It was a terrifying climb, but they made it. From the high ledge they could look down on their home, now empty and silent. As the sun rose, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Gideon Hale, Captain Munro, and 40 cavalrymen, flanked by the Dolan brothers, rode into the rancheria. They found it empty. A trap, Munro yelled, raising his hand. It's not a trap, you fool. Gideon screamed, his face purple with rage. They've run. Find them. Burn this place to the ground. We will not, Munro said. We are here for a captive, not to commit arson. They're here, one of the Dolan brothers yelled, pointing. He had spotted a fresh moccasin print near the base of the cliff. They've gone into the rocks. Ambush! Victorio's voice roared from the cliffs above them on the opposite side of the canyon. He and his 20 warriors had not fled. They had taken the high ground, creating a diversion to protect the escaping women and children. Gunfire exploded from the cliffs. The canyon Tsein Dagai became a perfect echo chamber of death. Cavalrymen's horses panicked. Munro, a professional, tried to establish a defensive perimeter. Return fire. Find cover. Gideon Hale, in a blind rage, grabbed a rifle and started firing wildly at the cliffs. Victorio, show yourself, you coward! Give me back my woman!" From her high ledge, Eliza watched in horror. It was a massacre. The soldiers were trapped, but Victorio's men were vastly outnumbered. Then she saw it. One of the Dolan brothers, a skilled tracker, had ignored the main fight. He was circling the base of their cliff. He had found the hidden path. He was coming for them. "Talia," Eliza whispered, her heart stopping. "One of them. He's coming." Talia grabbed her rifle, but Eliza knew the path. She picked up a heavy rock. "No, he knows the path, but not the weak step." She crept to the edge, just as the Dolan brother's head appeared. He saw her, his eyes wide with surprise, a cruel grin on his face. "Well, looky here, the lost lamb." He raised his rifle, but Eliza didn't hesitate. She slammed the heavy rock down on the loose shale overhang he was using as a foothold. The weak step. The rock gave way. The Dolan brother, his grin frozen in a mask of shock, lost his footing and plunged backward, his scream cut short as he hit the canyon floor 30 feet below. Eliza was shaking, sick but alive. Down below, the battle raged. A bullet screamed off the rock near Victorio. He staggered, clutching his side, blood pouring between his fingers. He was hit. "No," Eliza whispered. Gideon Hale saw it too. "He's hit. He's mine." Gideon began scrambling up the rocks, forsaking all cover, obsessed with landing the killing blow himself. Victorio was cornered. He was leaning against a boulder. His rifle lost his knife in his hand. The wound in his side was bleeding heavily. Gideon Hale climbed the last few feet, his face a mask of triumphant madness. He leveled his repeater at Victorio's chest. "So this is the great chief," Gideon panted, savoring the moment. "A wounded dog in a ditch. Where is she, Savage? Where is Eliza?" "She is not yours." Victorio managed, bracing himself for the shot. "Everything is mine," Gideon hissed. "And what I can't have, I destroy. Just like I destroyed her. Just like I destroyed that stable boy, Patrick." Dumped his body in a mine shaft. No one ever found him. He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "And now I destroy you." He cocked the hammer. "Gideon." The voice was Eliza's. She was standing on a ledge 20 yards away, a rifle in her hands, one she'd taken from Talia. Her face was streaked with dirt and fury, and she was aiming it directly at his heart. Gideon froze his eyes wide. "Eliza, my dear, you're safe. Look, I've come to rescue you from this animal." "You are the animal," she said, her voice echoing in the canyon. "I heard you. You admitted it. You murdered Patrick. You framed me." "It doesn't matter, my love," Gideon said, his smile turning sickly. He slowly began to turn his rifle from Victorio toward her. "We can go home. All is forgiven. Just put the gun down." "No," she said. "Your lies end here." "Then you die with him," Gideon screamed, swinging his rifle around. "Mr. Hale, stand down." The voice was Captain Monroe's. He and 2 soldiers had advanced up the canyon floor and now stood below Gideon's perch. "This is not your affair, Captain," Gideon yelled. "It is now," Monroe said, his own rifle aimed at Hale. "We found someone on our way in. A trader named Samuel." Gideon's blood ran cold. "He was agitated," Monroe continued, his voice heavy with disgust. "He confessed. He told us everything. How you threatened his family. How you forced him to reveal this location. How you never had proof Victorio raided your wagons." He gestured to the dead Dolan brother on the canyon floor. "These are your hired guns, Hale, not army scouts. You've used the United States Army to settle a personal score." "You're a fool!" Gideon shrieked, panicked. "She's a harlot. He's a savage. Shoot them." "No, Mr. Hale," Monroe said. You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and inciting a military conflict under false pretenses. And ambas, he added grimly, murder. We'll be checking those mine shafts. Gideon trapped his sanity snapping, let out a howl of rage. He made his choice. He turned his rifle on the captain, the man who had exposed him. If I'm going to hell, I'm taking you with me. He fired, but he was too slow. Victorio, in a last surge of strength, had thrown his knife. The blade embedded itself deep in Gideon's shoulder, spoiling his aim. The bullet went wide, striking the rock above Monroe's head. Gideon screamed, dropping his rifle, clutching his ruined shoulder. Before he could recover, Monroe's soldiers were on him, dragging him down the rocks, binding his hands. It was over. The canyon fell silent, save for the moans of the wounded. Eliza scrambled over the rocks to Victorio. He had slumped to the ground, his back against the boulder, his hand pressed to his side. "Eliza," he breathed. "I'm here," she said, her voice breaking. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it hard against the wound. "I'm here. You're safe." He looked at her, his dark eyes, full of a pain and a pride she had never seen. "You came back." "I told you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, washing away the dust. "This is my home." Captain Monroe approached his face, grim. He looked at the bodies of his soldiers, then at Victorio, then at Eliza. He took off his hat, a gesture of respect. "Ma'am, Miss Beaufort, this has been a terrible mistake." "His name is Victorio," Eliza said, not looking up from her work. "He is not a savage. He is a man. And he needs a surgeon, not your prison." Monroe looked at the scene at the rage-filled Gideon Hale, being tied to a horse, at the weeping woman tending the Apache chief. He had followed the rules and it had led to this. Now he would follow his conscience. "My field medic will tend to his wound," Monroe said. As a gesture of truce. "Your quarrel was with Hale. It appears so was ours. We will take Hale back to Tucson for trial. We will leave your people in peace." He looked at Eliza. "Are you coming with us, ma'am? I can guarantee your safe passage." Eliza looked at Gideon, a pathetic, vanquished figure. Then she looked at Victorio, who was watching her, his life hanging in the balance, but his gaze unwavering. She had been given a choice before. She made it again. "No, Captain," she said, pressing the bandage tight as Victorio winced. "I am already home." The canyon, which had echoed with the screams of men and the thunder of rifles, fell into a profound, heavy silence. The only sounds were the moans of the wounded and the sharp, curt commands of Captain Monroe organizing his men. Gideon Hale, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, and his shoulder crudely bandaged, was lashed to his horse. He was still screaming strings of curses and threats that were now hollow and pathetic. "You'll all hang for this, Monroe, you traitor Eliza, you—" "Gag him," Monroe ordered, his voice flat and dead. A soldier complied, stuffing a rag into Gideon's mouth. The sudden quiet was a relief. Monroe, his uniform stained with dust and a visible weariness in his shoulders, approached Eliza. He stopped a respectful distance from where she knelt beside Victorio. "My medic will see to him now, ma'am," he said formally. Peterson, the young medic, knelt his leather bag, thudding softly. He was all business, his hands quick and efficient. Eliza flinched her hand, still pressed against Victorio's side, unwilling to move. "I need the wound, ma'am," Peterson said, not unkindly. Eliza looked at Victorio. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath his dark skin, but his breathing was steady. She nodded her hands, shaking, as she pulled them away, revealing the dark, bloody tear in his flesh. Talia and 2 other Apache women stood just behind her, their arms crossed their faces like stone, watching the medic's every move with undisguised suspicion. Peterson worked fast, cleaning the entry and exit wounds. Bullet passed clean through. He muttered more to himself than to Eliza. Cracked a rib but missed the lung and the liver. By an inch. Lucky. He began to deftly stitch the wound, his needle flashing. Victorio didn't stir, lost in a deep shock. "He's tough," Peterson said to Eliza, finally tying off the last stitch and applying a clean bandage. "Tougher than any man I've ever seen. Keep it clean. Keep him warm. He'll live." Eliza felt her knees buckle with the relief. She had been holding her breath, she realized, for hours. The cavalry mounted. Monroe gave the order to move out his men, forming a grim procession, leading their wounded and their one raving prisoner. As he passed, Captain Monroe paused and looked at Eliza. He took off his hat. It was not a gesture of gallantry, but of profound apology. He said nothing, simply nodded once, a final weary acknowledgement of the terrible mistake that had been made, and rode on. Eliza watched them go until the last rider disappeared down the canyon. She was alone, surrounded by the Chihende. Her people, the women and children, their faces pale with fear, descended from the eagle's nest. There were quiet tears as wives found their husbands, and a few sharp wails of grief from those who did not. The camp was not burned, but it was scarred. The price of their safety had been paid in blood. Talia directed 2 men to make a litter. "We take him to his wickiup." Eliza, her body, a single throbbing ache, walked beside the litter, her hand resting on Victorio's arm, as if to assure herself he was still there. They entered the familiar smoky lodge, and the warriors gently laid him on his sleeping furs. And so the vigil began. For the first day, Eliza didn't move. She was a statue of grim purpose. She cleaned the wound as Peterson had shown her, cooled Victorio's brow, and tried to force sips of water between his cracked lips. He was burning with fever, lost in a delirious world, his body fighting the invasion. By the second night, the fever peaked. Victorio became restless, thrashing against the furs, murmuring in his own language, sharp, guttural commands, and once a name that made Talia, watching from the corner, flinch with a sharp intake of breath. Eliza was terrified. She had seen men die of fever back east. She had watched her own mother succumb. She would not lose him. Not now, after they had survived Gideon, the soldiers, and the reckoning. Talia entered the lodge, her steps silent. She carried a wooden bowl of hot, thin broth. Eliza, her eyes red-rimmed, and her hair matted, barely glanced at it. "He will not drink," Eliza whispered, her voice raw. "It is not for him," Talia said. She pushed the bowl into Eliza's shaking hands. "It is for you. I'm not hungry. You will eat." Talia's voice was not a request. It was the same tone of command she used with her own son. He will not die from the wound. Peterson was right, but he will wake to find his healer dead from exhaustion if you do not care for yourself. "I can't leave him." "You will not. But you will eat. You will drink." Talia watched as Eliza, too tired to argue, obediently sipped the broth. It was scalding salty and revived a small spark in her. Talia knelt by her brother, placing a calloused hand on his forehead. "The fever will break, or it will not. It is in Usen's hands now," she said, naming their creator. "You have done all a woman can do. Now Zagola." She said the Apache name, sounding natural from her lips for the first time. "You must rest. Go, sleep. I will watch." The word, the order, and the quiet respect behind it finally broke through Eliza's resistance. She nodded, her body slumping. She crawled to a spare mat on the other side of the lodge, and before her head even settled, she was lost to a sleep as deep and dark as the canyon at midnight. She woke to silence. A different kind of silence. Not the heavy fevered breathing from the night before, but a still quiet. Nothing. Panic seized her. She bolted upright. The wickiup was dim, the morning sun just beginning to filter through the smoke hole. Talia was gone. "Victorio," she whispered, scrambling to her knees. He was awake. His eyes were open. The fever was gone. They were clear, dark, and focused directly on her. A dry, rasping sound came from his throat. "You look," he managed his voice, a gravelly whisper, "terrible." A choked, hysterical laugh escaped her, a sound that was half sob. "You don't look so good yourself." She crawled to his side, her hands fluttering, not knowing where to land. She settled for dipping a cloth in the water bucket and pressing it to his lips. He drank his eyes, never leaving her face. "How long?" he asked. 3 days, she said. "The fever broke last night." He absorbed this, his gaze moving around his lodge, reorienting himself. "The soldiers. Hail. They're gone," Eliza said, her voice turning flat as she recounted the facts. "Captain Monroe arrested Gideon. He confessed Victorio, in front of all of us. He admitted to murdering Patrick, the stable hand. He admitted to framing me. Monroe heard it all. He said they'll check the mine shafts. He said Gideon will be tried in Tucson. He will hang." Victorio closed his eyes for a long moment. "Justice," he said, the word sounding foreign. "A white man's justice." "It's still justice," Eliza insisted softly. His eyes opened again, locking with hers. He slowly lifted his hand, the one that was not on his wounded side. It was shaking from weakness, but his intent was strong. He reached out, and this time his hand didn't hesitate. His calloused, warm fingers brushed a matted lock of hair from her face, his thumb grazing the line of her jaw. It was a touch more profound, more possessive than any Gideon Hale had ever imagined. "You saved me, Izagola," he whispered. I just stopped the bleeding. "Talia, the camp. You saved me." He repeated his gaze, unwavering, cutting off her protests. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing the tears she had held back for 3 days, finally tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. We saved each other. They stayed like that for a long time, the camp coming to life, outside the sounds of children playing and women grinding corn, a distant familiar song. The sun moved, and the light streaming through the lodge entrance turned from pale yellow to a deep, warm gold. The sunset was beginning. Eliza thought of that first terrible sunset on the Devil's Anvil. The sun had been a vengeful eye, and he had been a terrifying silhouette, a savage come to claim her. That first day, she said, her voice barely audible, "when you found me, I thought you were death." He didn't smile, but his expression softened. "I was," he said, "death to the woman you were, the woman in the silk dress who wept for a life that was a lie. I was not death for the woman you are." "And who am I?" She asked the question, more for herself than for him. His hand tightened on her face, pulling her closer until their foreheads were almost touching. "You are the one who held a rock to my warrior. You are the one who learned the metate when your hands bled. You are the one who chose the high ledge and the one who chose to fight. You are Izagola. You are the heart of the Chihenda." He paused, his voice dropping. "You are my heart." Eliza's breath hitched. The banished bride, the town harlot, the lost captive. All those names, all those versions of her were burned away like chaff in a fire. She had been sent to Apache land to be erased. Instead, she had been found. She looked at this man, a war chief of a people, at war with her entire world, and she saw her truth. Her future would not be easy. It would be a fight every single day for survival, for a small piece of this hard, beautiful land. It would be a life on the edge of a vanishing world. But it would be real. It would be a life of loyalty, of strength, and of a love more powerful than the desert itself. The sun had set on her past. As she leaned down and gently, finally pressed her lips to his, Eliza Beaufort knew with absolute certainty that this was her dawn. The story of Eliza and Victorio became a whispered legend in the Arizona Territory, a tale of how a woman, thrown away by civilization, found her true soul among the very people she was taught to hate. It's a story that reminds us that our true family isn't always the one we're born into, but the one we're willing to fight for. The world is full of Gideon's people who will tear you down to build themselves up. But true strength, like Eliza's, is found in survival, in choosing loyalty over safety, and in recognizing love even when it wears a face the world has told you to fear. Thank you for listening to this story. If you were moved by Eliza's journey and her defiance against injustice, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of true strength, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas just like this one. Your support allows us to keep telling these incredible stories. We'll see you in the next one.